We love to build systems. We love to make them important and do amazing things. But unfortunately, in the process of doing that, we sometimes build custom things that don't work the way that they're supposed to. We build snowflakes. We need to stop that in this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast. Welcome to the Tech Field Day podcast, where each episode we bring together a group of IT experts from across the enterprise IT space to discuss a premise or a topic, usually related to one of the things that we talk about during the Tech Field Day event series. We're here at Networking Field Day this week, and we brought together a group of experts to discuss exciting trends in the networking space. I'd like to take a moment for our guests to introduce themselves before we jump into today's topic, starting with Dakota.
Hi everyone, my name is Dakota Snow. I am a YouTube host of the Bearded IT Dad and also the IT Career Podcast. And my day job that actually pays the bills, I'm a director of network operations for a fiber optic ISP.
I'm Steve Puluka. I'm a network architect with GQE Communications out of Pittsburgh, also a fiber ISP and Metro Ethernet provider.
And I'm Bob McCouch, a 25-year networking veteran who works for a national solutions integrator called AHEAD.
All right, thank you all very much for joining us. Let's jump into today's premise. We have spent a lot of our careers building bespoke, custom, artisanal networks and systems. Everything is special and different most of the time, but in reality, we're iterating on the same designs that we've been doing over and over again. But this time it's different, and maybe it's only about 5% different until it comes time for us to be able to do things like automation or observability. And then we find out that this beautiful, unique snowflake is causing us a massive amount of headache. And if we'd have just built it a little bit differently to start with, we probably wouldn't be dealing with all this hassle. So the premise for this episode is that we really need to stop building snowflakes. And I say that in my heart of hearts. I know I've done this. If I'd have just come up with a standard way of doing things, it would have been so much easier. And yet, I find myself taking the same shortcuts time and time again. So I'm going to toss this out to my expert friends here. Why do we spend so much time building these snowflakes?
I'll jump in and kick it off. And coming from the Metro Ethernet provider, a lot of our Snowflake operations come from customer requests that you just really don't want to say no. I mean, their customers are like your kids. If they want something, you want to give it to them. And it's only a little bit different than the standard offering. So we should be able to pull this off, and the equipment will do it. The parameters are all there, so why not?
Oh, I know why not. Because you're going to forget why it's different and special when you go back in 6 months to try to troubleshoot something. And then you're sitting there going, what kind of an idiot would build this? Oh, wait, I'm that idiot.
Well, and one thing I've noticed is when an organization is small or they're in their startup phase, you kind of want to bend a little bit more. You have that feeling like you have to go off the norm, off the beaten path. But just like you said, as soon as you do, and it's not either properly documented, because let's be honest, none of us has time to document things properly.
Speak for yourself.
But yeah, you'll forget why it's like that. Or when stuff hits the fan and you're trying to troubleshoot this and have no recollection on how it's built, how are you going to fix it at that point?
Yeah, I think the reality is most networks undergo largely organic growth, right? Mm-hmm. They're designed for a certain scale, a certain feature set, and then typically hopefully the organization grows, or it adapts in some way, right? Maybe it shrinks, but it grows. Maybe there's mergers, acquisitions that take place, and so there's this continual sort of organic growth that usually happens with a smaller set of operators who may be learning, little tweaks, little optimizations along the way that they want to work into the next and the next and the next. And of course, what we don't typically do is go back and update something that's working and make changes to it in order to try to, have it conform to a new, what we think is a new standard, what we've told ourselves is a new standard, which is only the standard until we discover the next little tweak to make. So I think that organic growth tends to happen And that organic change tends to cause a lot of those snowflakes. Very infrequently, I think, does a team of network engineers sit down and have the opportunity to develop a completely thorough set of requirements that will remain fixed and not have any deviations required, and then be able to implement that time after time after time. Right. So the question is, how do you now go back and start to consolidate and unify? Right. And I think, to me, that's the real key.
I would argue that that's true. Like we see this kind of organic growth, but even in IT, we have boundaries. Like there's only certain amounts of things that we can do. Like obviously, I want 800 gigabit per second performance from this switch that I bought from, Newegg. Well, I'm sorry, it just doesn't support that. But more importantly, we also are working within a certain set of bounds. And one of the things that I think about this when I'm giving people an analogy is we talk about cars, right? I want you to order a car from a car dealer, and you have a certain set of options that you can pick from, right? Like you can get cloth seats or leather seats, you can get a moonroof or no moonroof, but you don't get total like customizability. Like you can't put the Corvette seats in the Trailblazer. You can't, add additional things that are not there. You can't put like 35-inch wheels on a Corvette. That's just not an option that's available. And when you give people a limited set of deployment options, a lot of the snowflakiness goes away because they're like, oh, well, you mean I can't configure this? No, that's not an option that you can do. Right. Oh, okay, fine. So should we stop bending to the customer's will and saying, no, we just can't do that?
I think it's not even the customer we're bending to. Sometimes it's the management team, the leadership team that really doesn't have an understanding of what's practical and what they saw on the latest, blog article that's wholly impractical. They're like, hey, this new technology is a new thing. Put it into production next week. And to do that properly and not make this snowflake scenario, you would have to forklift your entire environment in all actuality. So I think we find these shortcuts to sometimes try to meet in the middle and try to halfway do it. And in that instance, we're creating these snowflake networks.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Is that the advancing forward in increments is not something they do just to do. They're doing from demand from something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a requirement to do something, and so you have to do it right away. And then what happens is, if, as you said, the network grows, and when it gets too big, or when it gets big enough, I should say, then it's a requirement that we have these tools available to both maintain it and continue to grow it. And those tools become exponentially harder to create and use when the design is completely snowflaked.
Yeah, I think there's a level of discipline within the network engineering space as well that we have some level of control over, right? And I think the key there is recognizing that one standard, one specific, golden configuration or golden design is probably not a fit for an entire enterprise, right? Mm-hmm. So you need to t-shirt size, or you need to have, the high, medium, and low, or something like that. But you need to have enough options that can meet the needs in terms of flexibility for the business. That again might be budgetary based. They might be scale based. There could be any number of sort of influences there. But then once you've defined those couple of options, right? Maybe it's a couple and maybe it's 6. Then you need to stick to those, right? And the challenging part there can be that everybody, again, from a budgetary or managerial perspective, whatever, always wants, well, we want the medium, but we want just a little bit more resiliency, or we want the large, but we can't afford that, so why don't we do this?
That's actually one of the reasons why I feel like we're getting to a point where there are more snowflake-ish type things, is that a lot of it comes from doing the minimum. Like when someone says, well, I want you to configure this, but I can't afford these other pieces of it. And so you're sitting there thinking to yourself, well, how can I accomplish that goal while preserving as much cost as possible? And so then you kind of overreach yourself. It's like, oh, well, yeah, I can totally turn this feature on that gives you a little bit of that, except nobody would in their right mind would use that feature in a particular scenario like that.
Yeah.
You know, like think of the number of times that you've had to turn on like some kind of weird like layer 2 data center interconnect, or my other favorite one from my career was extension mobility for phones. I'm like, by the way, don't use that ever. Bad idea. But it's like I built a snowflake that I never got a chance to fix because no one in their right mind should ever do anything like that. Yet the customer was like, well, we want to do this little feature, but we don't want to pay for the license for that feature. And I'm like, well, I think I can make it work like this. So are we creating our own worst enemy by doing a little bit more than we should?
Yeah, well, I think that's a trend that I've seen, or an attribute that I've seen across my entire career, which is I think by our nature, I think most IT engineers, and I think network engineers in particular, are resourceful. We're natural problem solvers.
We're people pleasers.
People pleasers is
and we're people pleasers, right? But you know, so when those challenges come up or when those requests come up, we're very apt to say, well, yeah, I mean, I would prefer not to do it this way, but there is a way we can do that, right? And I think that tends to lead to, you know, as you call it, kind of doing this bare minimum, or just, you know, finding a way to make a little compromise to make someone happy that now has broken from the standard, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's one of those times where you need to have enough flexibility to, again, have some variety in your options, but then have enough discipline to say, nope, these are our options, because now you can templatize those, you can automate around those, you can audit against those, right? You can validate those configurations, those designs, those environments, and actually be able to demonstrate business value through that standardization, you know, and be able to show the business, hey, look, it is more efficient to operate a standardized network, even if that standard involves 4 different site designs or 6 different scale options or whatever it is.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I think that's one of the things that I took away when I made a brief transition into programming a couple decades ago, is this modularization. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that we have been slow to come to in the network engineering space. And one of the analogies I've been using recently, because it seems to click with network engineers, is Legos. You've got to think of your features and your options in the network. You pick the ones that you want to support, and you can put them together in different ways, but you always use these same bricks. And you decide as a team, these are the best ones for the types of services we have to deploy. These are the best ones for our gear and architecture that we have. And these are what we use. And then once you've made that decision, then when you actually have to get back to being a programmer, which you actually have to be now as a network engineer, and write those scripts and those automations, it becomes a very practical thing to be able to do, because you've taken that big picture step and made those modules.
Yeah. And one biggest problem I keep on coming back to is a lot of times you might not be the one who initially built the snowflake. You inherited the snowflake. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to get buy-in when the snowflake is technically working, and we can just continue to band-aid, perma-fix the problem, instead of, hey, this is the way it should be done. It's hard to see and communicate that return on investment to project stakeholders.
Yeah. And there's I'd say 2 big drivers that are causing us to have to validate this again. And one of them is network automation, because as we've seen, as we've started implementing these network automation solutions, the enemy of a good automation solution is an exception. Yes. It's like, oh, well, I can run this across 20 switches. It's the 21st switch that becomes a problem because it has a different firmware version on it, or it has a different configuration because it was the first one that I deployed, or something like that. And so network automation projects are being halted, or put it on an indefinite suspension because, well, we just can't make it work the right way across the whole enterprise. When in fact, the reason why we can't is because we don't have a homogeneous enterprise. Right. We have a multi-vendor, cross-connected nightmare of, well, these switches were on sale this week. So, is automation going to cause us to reevaluate how we build these things to make them more Lego-like, or are we just going to have to give up on the dream of having robots run our network?
Well, so I can tell you that the approach that my company actually takes with our customers is looking at a holistic network modernization strategy, right? And so many individuals, engineers, partners, vendors, when they say network modernization, what they mean is just a tech turn, right? Just take the old gear out and put new gear that's not end of life anymore in place. Because that's the easy way, right? That's easy. If it works, just replace the gear so that it's still under support and move on. And we look at network modernization in a much more holistic manner, right? And that's really like applying large pillars of a modern envisioning of your network, right? So that includes, lifecycle management, right? Making sure that you actually have a plan, and that goes to not just doing, oh, hey, everything's end of life this year, like let's replace it all, right? But instead, actually having a strategy and saying, hey, we turn over 20% of our gear every year, or whatever it may be.
Patching,
right? Things like that, right? So overall lifecycle management, right? Automation being a pillar of looking at a network modernization program, right, and building to that. So as you're rethinking your network, rethinking how you can automate it in the process, right? Zero trust. How do you, as you're doing this process and you're looking at automation, how do you build the network with security and observability in mind from the get-go, right? How do you extend it into, a hybrid cloud and multi-cloud type environment? So that's our particular strategy when we're working with customers is you do have to take a holistic look at it, and it's not a project, it's a program. And it's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens for free. There's got to be some organizational, backing behind it, and some buy-in from leadership. But it can result in moving toward that standardized, that automatable, observable network.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes time, and it's got to be something that's got, that's beyond just the individual network engineer saying, boy, I want to make this better. Those people, those guys and gals have the best intentions in the world that I'm just going to start automating things.
Right.
But if they don't have the backing of the organization from a leadership and management and executive level, it's a real uphill battle.
Well, and previously I've talked on this podcast about how no one wants to be a network engineer, and the industry as a whole is facing the problem of these growing networks and these larger and larger network deployments, while the people who are actually supporting these networks is shrinking and shrinking the teams. And it's becoming a necessity. You have to have these systems in place, this network automation in place, because there's becoming less and less people aware of how everything should be working together. And if you don't have these processes and you go to leave for another organization, you're leaving that snowflake out for someone else to hopefully be able to figure out and fix.
And it's not just that the network is growing, it's the demands for change day to day is also growing too. The networks used to be static. You built it and then you replaced it in 7 years. It's not static anymore. We're getting daily or regular demands for small changes that are necessary for various equipment. More and more things have to be plugged into the network one way or another in order to work. Stuff we never thought of before as being network devices.
Well, the pace of change within the business environment overall is just doing nothing but accelerating. And of course, the dependence on connectivity and moving data from one place to another, right? And internet enabling all the things, IoT and OT and process control, all of these things, that's done nothing but just hockey stick in the last 10 years or so, 10, 15 years. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Like the pace of demand, it's the only way, right? The pace of the pace of change and the demand around that from the business, and frankly, the importance of the network to the business, whether they recognize it or not, has done nothing but accelerate. And so that's what drives that.
Down.
They recognize it when it goes down. The network is truly what's generating revenue for most organizations. Because if the network goes down, work's not getting done. They're not making money. So that uptime is crucial. And by having that standardization in the network, you're hopefully preventing that downtime from happening.
The resiliency.
Resiliency, yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And the biggest thing that a network operator can do to prove that value to the business is actually, get those processes and tools and automation tool chains and everything in place to be able to actually keep up with that pace. Because when you no longer look like the laggard, when it's no longer, well, we're waiting on the network team again, right, to help enable this new application or bring up the new remote office or whatever it is, when that can be ideally even pipelined into a provisioning process or an overall automation job, but even if not, just something that can happen quickly, proactively, right? That's where you start to drive genuine business value, and that's when the business starts to recognize the importance of investing in its technology. The technology has to be an asset and an advantage, not a drain on on the P&L. Right?
And when you have the mature automation system, it's self-service then too. So the actual customer that needs to bring on that new service or new devices can actually just go in and say, here, I'm in this this location or this room. I need this service for this device, and boom, the automation runs in the background, and within a reasonable amount of turnarounds and approvals, the thing is happening with the user initiating it on demand for when the user needs it.
Right, but that brings you back full circle, right? If everything is a snowflake, that you will never get there. You will never get to that place, right? Because every single time there will be some exception that kills the automation.
Because one of the things we forget now in this growing cloud era is, I know the number one reason AWS entered into organizations when it was in its infancy was, I'm a IT person in a company somewhere. I want to do something today, and my IT department told me it would take 2 weeks, 2 months, or whatever to get it done. So what do? I swipe out my company credit card, and I go to AWS, and it's spun up today.
Right. Well, I mean that's the reason behind pretty much any shadow IT, right? Is it's faster, it's more agile. Occasionally it's cheaper, but it usually has to do with keeping up with the pace of business, right? So you need to get the intended IT environment to be able to keep pace. The internal services to be able to be that agile, that available, that flexible, and that's how you get rid of the shadow IT. But you're absolutely right. I mean that's a big reason that we saw the explosion of cloud services, right?
So one of the things I like to do when I record these podcasts, I like to give a little bit of a takeaway for people at home. So I'm going to ask you, professionals, what's one thing that someone can do today to reduce their snowflake, to melt it a little bit, if you will? One thing that you can implement, one thing that you can change, one thing that you can do that will prevent this from being a stopper of work in the future.
Throw money at it.
Throw money?
You are so American, man.
But Dakota, I feel like that's the solution to a lot of problems.
Yeah. It's really, I think, having an understanding of the problem. You need to fully grasp what's going on. And again, with automation and stuff, there is no one solution fits all. There's several different ways you can perform this task. It can be as simple and you can go with third-party solutions. You can try to make something in-house, or you can go with a baked-in solution, such as something like Cisco Meraki is, in a sense, one way to get rid of the snowflake, because you no longer have that granular control built in. Platforms like Cisco Meraki and others out there really kind of give you a set of rails you can kind of stick to, and you really can't go outside this box. And it enables smaller teams to be able to pivot quicker and spin things up before they even hit the site and stuff like that.
So if you're in a network now that's in this state, so you're in the brownfield, the number one thing you can do is get your documentation, update your documentation, and then study it with an eye to this modularization. So what are the key components of the services your customers need? Not what your equipment can do, but your end-to-end services that a customer is asking you for in your organization. Break those down into their modular formats. And once you, at that point, now you're ready to go out to the example designs from the various vendors you're dealing with and see what of these modules, what of these example designs are the right ones for the services I need to deliver. And now you're in a position to build yourself a path to get there, maybe starting by just saying new services are built in this new way. And eventually, as gear is replaced, I move the whole network into this mold.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. Right. It's exceedingly difficult to go back to everything that's already working, or mostly working, or working but maybe inefficiently, right, and make a lot of change there. It's far easier to just draw a line in the sand and say, hey, from here on, we're going to follow these standards, right? And what I would say there in terms of the suggestion, the recommendation is, be bold, right? Be a little bit rigid in the fact that there's reasons we need to follow these standards because they will pay dividends down the road in our ability to reduce mean time to resolution, increase availability, reduce cycle time for new deployments, right?
You're making an investment.
Right. You've got to kind of build that business case a little bit with your leadership because it does require a bit of investment. Maybe it's a monetary investment, maybe it's a time investment, maybe it's a people investment, but there does need to be some investment and the payoff is there. But you need to articulate that.
This isn't an overnight plan you're building. This is a decade-long probably goal.
Could be,
depending on the size of your organization. But this you're not going to make the change overnight. But by doing the legwork now and having a plan, like you said, draw that line in the sand from this point forward, you're just making it easier on yourself, making it easier on the organization, and it's just going to pay back dividends in the long run.
Well, as you can see, even the best intentions in the world sometimes end up creating something unique and difficult to manage. Usually it comes down to uncertainty and speed. We don't know quite what we're doing, but we know we need to do it as quickly as possible. And so we get the minimum amount of work done to make it work. And then years later, we go back and curse ourselves for making it happen. So as you can tell from these group of experts, you need to have good documentation. You need to be ready to say no when someone tells you they need something custom and different. And you need to be ready to understand your requirements so that it will do exactly what you want it to do in a way that is repeatable, maintainable, and automatable in the future. That will just about do it for this episode of the Tech Field Day podcast. I want to thank each and every one of our guests for joining us. I also want to thank you for listening. Remember that you can find us on our YouTube channel. You can also find us on techfieldday.com/podcast. And you can follow us as a podcast in your favorite podcatcher. Just search for the Tech Field Day podcast. Leave us a rating and a review so that everybody knows kind of what we're all about here. Remember that we are also a part of the Futurum Group. And if you want to learn more information about some of the services they offer, head over to futurumgroup.com. We look forward to the next opportunity to share an interesting premise with you on the Tech Field Day podcast. Until then, stay tuned.